I'm doing a different take somewhat today because we're going to start this morning looking at this guy right here. And nice picture. His name, Mark Twain. Mark Twain made a very famous comment, and we're going to work on this today. I love Mark Twain. We used to, we read a lot of Mark Twain. One of our favorite memories early in our marriage was reading Mark Twain before we went to bed. Kind of odd, isn't it? Really, sort of. I can't remember what that was. It was a collection of short stories, and some of them are just absolutely hilarious. We would just, our heads would blow up laughing. Anyway, so Mark Twain said this, and I'm going to apply this to the resurrection today, because this is the day we talk about the resurrection and commemorate the resurrection, all that kind of. And if you got to think about it, the resurrection is a crazy kind of thing. Let's be honest, okay? Because we're talking about someone coming from the dead. It's not a natural occurrence. Didn't happen anywhere around here last week that I know of, and so it really is. It's a big deal, but it's an unbelievable big deal. So that's why. We're going to look at this in a rational sense today. He said, faith is believing what you know ain't so. Now, I don't agree with this statement. Got to go on record right now. But that's not an irrational statement. For a lot of people who live extremely ordered, rational lives, and I count myself as that, having been trained as an engineer, then the whole idea about the resurrection really is so crazy in so many respects. You got to admit the fact that it's a little over the top. So if you join a church or something like that, and they say, well, we believe in the resurrection. A lot of people come at the resurrection like this, that well, I guess I got to believe to be part of this community. But after all, this faith is believing in something that's just can't be right. It's not true. So what I want to ask today is that your mindset? Or is there still a lingering part of that in your mindset, as opposed to this guy? And let me show you a second guy who is a contemporary of Mark Twain, who also lived in Missouri at exactly the same time and bore a strong resemblance. This guy right here. Isn't that great? A better mustache and better hair. So this guy, his name is Willard Vandiver. Anyone whose first name is Willard is in my book. He's a good guy. You put up with a lot of junk all your life. Anyway, he was a representative, U.S. congressman from Missouri, and one of his most prominent things he did was he sat on the naval, procurement, whatever it is, where they ask money from Congress and stuff like that. So he was one of the guys on that board in Congress that would say, enough money or too much money or here's some more money, all that kind of stuff. So it was during the time that he was actually on one of these appropriations committees where someone was making a pitch from the Navy side, asking for money for more boats or something like that. And Vandiver, he's sitting right there on the council, and he's listening to all this, and he very famously said this during that meeting. He said, I come from a state that raises corn and cotton and cockleburs and Democrats. In that order. And frothy eloquence neither convinces nor satisfies me. You see, I'm from Missouri. You have to show me. You got to show me. And this is where the show me state came from. Most people believe. There's some other legends, but most people think it's from this. I'm from Missouri. You've got to show me. So here's the contrast this morning between these two 19th century Missourians. Is it faith is believing what you know ain't so, or do you take a position of, I'm not sure yet, you got to show me? And those are two radically different mindsets when it comes to the resurrection. So the question I'm going to ask this morning is this. Does the Bible cater to one of those over the other? That is, does the Bible, in Mark Twain's case, say, I'm sorry we can't prove this, but you're just going to have to believe it anyway because you know it couldn't have happened, but you're going to have to believe it? Or does it give us some rational facts that you can say, show me, and you can build a case for it? So that's what we're going to look at. So in your mind, which one of those two do you come from? Wow, just like clockwork. It's cool. So that's really the question this morning. Do you come from this very skeptical, a different kind of skeptical, which is no matter how much you tell me, I just know that it's not true, so I'm not going to believe it. You ask me to believe what can't be true. Or is it, well, show me the facts and let's talk about it. So those are the two mindsets. And what I want to look at today is whether the Bible caters to one over the other. Now, again, a lot of people who've never read the Bible presume the former. They presume that it says, here's what happened, I can't prove it, you just got to swallow it. That's faith. Well, let's find out. So we're going to make a case this morning, and we're going to use a very famous event when we try and figure out which one of these two mindsets really the Bible is created to address. And we're going to use a case after the crucifixion and after the resurrection. So just to recoup what happens, Jesus is crucified after being beaten literally to an inch of death. These beatings are just brutal. They're just brutal. In fact, this is one of our paintings from James-Jacques Tissot. And Tissot has a shot of the flogging from this side, and he has a picture from the other side. They're actually a pair of pictures, and you don't want to see the other side. I mean, really, it's brutal. So I showed you this side. So he's beaten to within an inch of death, what would normally cause people to die in the next couple days anyway. And then what they do is they take his body after he's died on the cross, and they put him in a tomb, a rich man's tomb. And you can tell it's a rich man's tomb because it's covered by a round rolling stone instead of another kind of closure thing. That was a very elegant, expensive way to close a tomb. But anyway, they close it up. They put a seal on it. That is, they put a string across the rock to the rolling tomb, and they put a wax on each end of the string to kind of act like it's a seal, is what they call it. It's a Roman seal, and no one is supposed to break this seal. And then they post guards, and here the guards are just kind of hanging out and waiting. Now, they posted guards, which is a very unusual thing, because Jesus had made known very clearly that he was going to rise on the third day. So he made it known so clearly that the leaders, who were afraid that Jesus might whip up some kind of huge rebellion if this hoax were to take place, decided to prevent it from happening, to prevent the hoax, by posting guards. And if you post guards, we'll just let this whole thing blow over. No one will steal the body and claim that Jesus raised from the dead. So it was very common knowledge, not just to Jesus' followers, but to his enemies, that he was going to do this, which is why they posted a guard, to prevent any kind of hoaxes, right? So that's what's going on. A couple days transpire, and then the women go to the tomb several days when it's first possible. And when they go to the tomb, they're greeted with a very strange thing. They get to the tomb. The tomb is open for one, because they're talking on the way about how they're going to open it. Neither one of them could open it or all together. When they get there, they see angels. and Jesus isn't inside. And they actually talk with these angels. You can read about it. It's at the end of every gospel account. Where are the soldiers? Well, this is speculation on our artist Tissot's part. But I like his version. They're all wiped out on the ground. It's like, bah, who knows what's going on. But in fact, if it's a Roman guard, and there's some discussion about whether it was Roman or a temple guard, but regardless, if it was a Roman guard, does not sleep when you're guarding. Because if you're found asleep and the thing you're guarding is taken, or the thing you're supposed to protect is taken, then the penalty for a sleeping guard on duty is death. So this is crazy stuff. Later on, after it's revealed that something really big has taken place, the religious leaders, in trying to soften the blow of the reality of the resurrection, they tell the soldiers, tell everyone you were sleeping, and that the disciples stole the body while you're sleeping. Well, they also probably had to guarantee, although we don't have in the passage, that they weren't going to get executed if they admitted that. Oh yeah, we were sleeping. Well, off with their heads. So they proposed this idea, and the writers of the gospel say, that story has gone on for decades now. That was the story. The soldiers fell asleep, unlikely. And then while they were asleep, the apostles came in, unlikely, because we know they were hiding, and they stole the body, unlikely again for several other reasons. And when they stole the body, then they came out and said, oh, look, he's risen from the dead. All very unlikely in so many ways. So, what's that? They'd make a lot of noise moving the stone. They'd make a lot of noise tiptoeing between the soldiers, which is probably 16 strong, and they're in battle defense array, so you don't get past them. There's a lot of reasons why that story just doesn't hold water. But at any rate, that's what happens. And so the women decide to come back and tell the apostles, and the apostles are hiding in a room behind a locked door. Now, it's one of the reasons why we know that this is probably not a fictionalized story, because in a fictionalized story at the time, you would never have women be the ones who find out such an important thing. It would be men, because women had no credibility. They were very lesser in society. So it is so dumb, Linda. I agree with you, but that was the culture at the time. So we find this account where the women have this prominent role of discovering the empty tomb and coming to the apostles and proclaiming it to them. They're the first ones to find out. That does not square with the culture, so it must be true, because it doesn't make sense it would go to women first. So it's just an interesting side thing. So anyway, they come. I don't know if you can see them in the dark. She comes and they talk to the apostles. The apostles, it says, are actually inside a closed room with the door locked for fear of the Jews. So they're cowering. So they come in and they say to the cowering apostles, he's not there. He's not there. And then in some accounts as well, they actually bump into him, into the risen Jesus on the way, and they say, not only he's not in the tomb, but we think he's risen because we talked to him. Now the apostles are frozen in fear in this room, and these women, by the way, several of them who started their life with Jesus in very low repute, they had bad reputations, and they're trying to convince the apostles that the tomb is empty and that Jesus is risen. And their reaction is, right. But two of them decide to go check it out. So two of them go running to the tomb, and that would be John and Peter, and they go running to the tomb just to check it out. Now, this is at fear for their own lives, because they very well could run into the soldiers at the tomb. Very well could. And the soldiers there could realize their difficult position, could arrest these two guys, could make it look like that they were in the process of stealing the body or coming back and fixing it up, and then gone to the leaders and said, we caught these two guys out there at the tomb, and they did something with them, and here's the two guys, and we caught them. They could have made a case. So this was a really dangerous thing for John and Peter to do. So they run to the tomb, they look inside, and sure enough, no body. No body. And they come back and they tell the apostles that. And they go back to cowering in the upper room. Because we know in the next couple scenes when we see them again, they're still up there behind locked doors. They're just, This goes on for that day. So the discovery happens in the early morning, first day of the week, that would be Sunday. The reports come back. They stay in their room. They don't know what to do about it. Jesus hasn't shown up anywhere to them. Who knows who to believe in all of this? It could be some kind of plot by the Jews to draw them out. It could be a trap. It's a trap. So we don't really know what's going to happen. So they stay in the locked room up until the evening. And then in the evening, something strange happens. And that's where we're going to pick up our passage today. John 20, verse 19, near the end of John's gospel. It says, on the evening of that day, so this is the end of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, peace be with you. Boom, boom, boom. And so John's very specific about the difficulty of getting into that room, which tells you there's something very different about Jesus right now. It didn't say he knocked on the door and they opened up that little window and said, who goes there? They didn't do all that kind of stuff. Jesus just showed up in the room. He just showed up in the room. And he showed up in the room in a way that was recognizable and somehow physical, because he showed him his hands in just a second here. By the way, I shared this story years ago with a fellow who was a physicist, and I was saying, it's just an incredible thing where Jesus can just show up in the middle of this room, and the doors are all locked, and there's no windows to crawl through, and it's seemingly impossible. It's like those murder mysteries where you come in and all the windows and doors are locked, but someone's dead inside. This guy comes in with all that, and this physicist said, no, if you knew a little bit about multidimensional physics, this is just not a big deal. And we talked about it for a while, and he reminded me of a story I'd read years ago called Flatland. I don't know if you've ever read this. It was written at the end of the 19th century. Flatland, and it discusses a mythical, fictional little society that lives in two dimensions, like on the surface of a piece of paper, right? They've got left and right, but they don't have up and down. They can't see up and down. They're just they live in a sheet of paper like this. And he says, think about it like that. Think about the fact that we're living in this sheet of paper, and in this sheet of paper, we lock all the windows and doors on the sheet of paper so no one can get in. But what about someone standing in a third dimension outside of it, looking actually inside the room, which you could do, and then actually putting yourself in the room even though the doors are all locked, because you're coming in from another dimension. So this physicist said, child's play. Okay. So it's really not that outrageous, but you got to think bigger than 3 dimensions and all this. So anyway, so Jesus shows up, and he says, peace be with you. And he says, okay, here we go. When he'd said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. So let me stop right here and go back to our two guys. One guy says, it's believing what you know ain't true, what's not so. And the other guy's saying, show me. So far, what's Jesus doing? He's showing. So we'll put 1 mark on that score, okay? He's showing them. He wants them to see what went on. The marks in his hand and on his side, he wants them to see it. And then Jesus said to them again, Peace be with you, as the Father has sent me, even so I'm sending you. So he's giving them a sneak peek in what's going to happen in the next several weeks or so. He's going to be sending them out in the same way that Jesus was sent to communicate the gospel with them. And then he goes on and says, and when he'd said this, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they're forgiven them. If you withhold forgiveness from any, it is withheld. Now, I wish we had time to talk about that verse 23, because that's caused a lot of confusion over the years. Just suffice it to say, what he's telling them is that what they see in terms of what's going on in the lives of people relative to the Lord and the Holy Spirit, they'll be able to communicate to people and say, that's what I see, that's what's going on. It doesn't give them special powers to rule the universe. It's not that. But we don't have time to get into that right now. But he just says this and gives them a sneak peek. Now, the problem with this story is in the next verse. Now, Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, Didymus in Greek, he wasn't with them when Jesus came. Darn. Yeah, doubting Thomas. So Thomas is not there. I've thought to myself years and years, why isn't it that Jesus didn't wait until they were all in the room together, and then he could get them all together? You know, he could stand outside above the plane of our life, you know, and say, well, I guess I got to wait until Thomas gets there, and we'll wait until they all get together. When everyone gets together, then we'll have this big thing, and they'll all freak out, and I'll come in, and it'll be all done. But he deliberately goes in and shows the others, but Thomas isn't there. Oh. Now, if you're Thomas, and you hear about this, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Bummed, left out, second class. I mean, there's a lot of negative emotions that really they're not godly in a real respect. Well, how come Jesus didn't wait for me? We all wait before we have dinner together, but we didn't wait till Jesus came in the room, did we? So, you know, it could be a lot of things, but Thomas is not there, and that's not an accident. There's a good reason for that. So the other disciples told him, well, we've seen the Lord. We've seen the Lord. And at this point, they could say, faith is believing what you know ain't so. So just accept it, Thomas. But Thomas says, I'm from Missouri. Unless I see his hands, the mark of the nails, and place my finger in the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. So I want to see too. Now, right here, if you were writing a graphic novel, you could write that Thomas went to bed that night, and while he was sleeping, he had a dream. And Jesus stood over him in the dream and said, how dare you question me? You know, and all this kind of stuff. And kill him on the spot for his disbelief. All that. I mean, really disrespect Thomas's doubting, you know. But he doesn't do that. You don't get any sense through all this as this unfolds that Jesus thinks lesser of Thomas because he says, not me. I want to see just like you guys did. I do. I want to see like you guys. Show me, he says. Well, 8 days later, the disciples are in sight again. I know, you got to laugh. You really got to laugh. They're not running around town saying, hey, Jesus is risen. They're still kind of clumped up like this. So they're in this upper room again, and it's locked, and it's deja vu all over again. This time, though, Thomas is with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. So Thomas's desire to also see and to also touch, Jesus honored. He honored. He didn't say, Thomas, you got to have more faith. You know, he said, okay, you want to see? I'll come back in 8 days. And we'll do this all over again, just for you, Thomas, just for you. Well, Thomas said to him, clicky, clicky, there it is. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, put out your hand, place it in my side. Don't disbelieve, but believe. So again, is it Mark Twain or is it Vandiver? Is it believing what you know ain't so or show me? It seems to be very show me. And God honors Thomas's desire to say, I want to touch myself. I want to do it myself. I want to see the whole thing. I don't want to be left out of this whole appearance. And Jesus honors that and does not chastise him right here. He doesn't do that. And then Thomas answers him after he sticks his finger in his side. By the way, if you're having a problem figuring out this picture, that light right there is Tissot's artistic license of the inside of Jesus. Like, you know, if you cut him, you'll see light. So this right here, this is Jesus' fingers pulling back the robe, and this is Thomas's hands pulling back the robe, and there's the scar on his side from the spear, and you're seeing inside Jesus, and there's light. But anyway, it's kind of a cool picture. I looked at this and thought, there's a problem. Someone has scraped the paint off right there next to Jesus' side. And I don't know what's going on. But yeah, that's what's going on. It's my right side. The other right, Kathy. Yeah. And also, since he was pierced, he was also, had nails in his hands. If you look at his hands, what do you see? You see light coming out. That's artistic license, so don't get all messed up about that. But anyway, that's what's going on. So Thomas answers him and says something that has messed up people's heads for a couple millennia. Are you ready? You sort of need a drum roll. Here we go. My Lord and my God. He uses the exact terms you use in the Old Testament for God when he addresses Jesus. He's not just using an expletive, we're just, oh, God. And he's not what he's doing. He's actually saying, my Lord, my God. And he's addressing this to Jesus when he sees him. A lot of people have said, well, I don't think he's really calling Jesus God because, okay, there's a problem. It's very hard when you look at the Greek. It's very simple, and he's really attributing lordship and godship to who Jesus is. So there you go. It's one of the strongest passages we talk about when we talk about, was Jesus God? Well, Thomas sure thinks so, because he just said it straight out. And Jesus does not correct him, nor does he get shouted down by the rest of the apostles. Oh, Thomas, come on, don't get carried away here now. It's just the Messiah. Oh, they don't do that. Okay, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus says to him, very provocative statement. Have you believed because you've seen me? And, this is provocative because I say it provokes me to think, was it really Thomas saying, I'm not going to believe unless I see? Or was there something more going on in Thomas's heart than just that? And, at this point, we're at speculation phase. We don't really know. But we do know that there's something about believing that has partially to do with fact and partially to do with desire. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm willing to believe. There's not only a logical part of belief, but there's a willingness part to believe. Those always go hand in hand. Like the first time I took a quantum physics class in college, I read the facts, I saw the data, I looked at the equations, and they told me what quantum physics was about, and I went, I don't think so. But part of me had to believe that as well as that. So it's partially having enough facts that you do a little synthesis from there and you say, well, is this really a good inference from what I'm seeing in the facts? I mean, can you really go here? And then we started studying things called tunnel diodes, which we made when I was in college. And a tunnel diode actually predicts the fact that electrons don't know exactly where they are. So if you put them behind a very narrow door, statistically, they could be on the other side of the door without going around it, but going through it. What? And that was quantum physics. And so I said, oh, well, okay, I believe. But to this day, I'm still skeptical. I don't know. Quantum physics. So there's really, in all the belief, there's partially understanding the facts, grappling with the facts, and then there's got to be a willingness to say, well, okay, I think this is a good explanation. I think in Thomas's case, he knew enough of the facts about who Jesus was up to that point. I don't think he really needed more facts. And I think that's what Jesus is saying to Thomas. I'm not really sure you needed these extra facts. But to humor you and to make another point to people reading this book 2,000 years later, that's okay. But is it really because you saw me? It's a way of Jesus saying, don't you know enough about me already? Really? Don't you? Really? And then he goes on and says this, blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. That's us. That's us. Well, we would love to have been able to be right there as well and touch the side and do all that stuff. But there's something about the fact that the body of information we know about Jesus, it's enough for us to say, I'm not sure I really need to see his side. I know it's true. Why? Because blind belief, like Mark Twain, is believing what you know ain't so? No, because there's enough information about who Jesus is to form a foundation for me to say, you know what? It's very likely that this is very much true because I know enough about Jesus. I know the facts support this. This isn't just a crazy claim. So yeah, for us, so many years later, I think that's why Thomas's account here, and even Jesus' account in talking to him about how have you believed, is important for us because this is the basis that we believe, and all the people after this event will have believed as well. Now, John goes on in his letter, in his gospel, and this is actually a close-up of the Gospel of John in the Bodmer Papyrus collection. It's called P66. We've been studying this on Sunday mornings. This papyrus that you see in a close-up of was penned somewhere between 150 and 200 AD. And John wrote his letter that we're reading right now, wrote his gospel around 90. So this is a copy of John's gospel written less than a generation after it was originally penned.
Okay, so that's Greek?
And that's Greek. For all those of you who are Greek readers, let's see, I didn't look early enough to see if there's any words I recognize, and there aren't. So there you go. Anyway, so John goes on in his gospel that we're reading from about Thomas. And the next thing that John says is really critical because he closes out the story about Thomas. You know, show me Bishop Missourian Thomas. And right after that, the next thing John says is very critical. It sounds like he's actually finishing his gospel. And he writes this. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So now I ask you, I go back to those two guys. Is this believing what you know ain't so? Or is this John saying, I'm writing so you can show me what the facts are? It's very much a show me thing. John says the very reason, just like Thomas, the very reason I'm writing all this stuff is to show you. I'm writing this down. This is firsthand testimony witness. I saw this myself, John will say a little bit later. I'm not only writing what I saw myself. This is what I saw, and this is what happened. And I'm writing it not just because you need something to read in the evenings, but because reading this, you'll come to understand who Jesus really is, who he really is. And understanding that and believing in who he is, find life in his name. So, is that believing what you know ain't so? Or is that a show me? Definitely a show me. Even John's purpose for writing the gospel is a show me. It's totally a show me. So when you get back to these two guys, it's a show me thing. Psalm 32, one of my favorite psalms, says about this show me attitude that God's catering to in his word. Psalm 32:8, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. Now that's not just blind faith. That's God's going to show us how to do this. I'll counsel you with my eye upon you. Be not like a horse or a mule without understanding, which must be curbed by bit and bridle, or it won't stay near you. So he says, I don't want you to be blind robots. I don't want you from heaven to have me have the bit and bridle of heaven saying, go left, Jim, go right, Jim. Whoa, boy, don't go running over there. God says, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to be like a mule or a horse, or in our vernacular, like a robot. I want you to have understanding. And if you really listen to me, I'll counsel you about all this. I'll let you know. I want you to know. I want you to say to me, show me. And God says, yes, I'll show you. And that's what the word is all about. And that's what he wants from us, understanding. He doesn't want just blind robot mules. Robot mules, okay? In fact, so the entire tenor of the Old and New Testament is a book that's written for people saying, show me, show me. I'm skeptical, show me. And God says, okay. And he writes and he shows us. Now you say to yourself, well, that might be persuasive to the people who got one of these letters from John really early on. Say like even that Bodmer papyrus we saw, late hundreds, mid-hundreds AD. I mean, that might be persuasive to them. It might be persuasive if I ran into a guy who knew John, but today, does that really work today? Because we're like 2,000 years after this stuff. I don't know really how compelling that is, because who knows if what we have in the Gospel of John is right. Well, we've been studying on Sunday mornings, and when you have a copy that dates to 150 to 200 AD, it's exactly what you have in your hands today. It's probably right. But there's another issue that goes on, because between these two guys, between the two, do I believe and turn off my logic, or do I believe because I want you to show me, we have another conundrum. Paul later on in 1 Corinthians 15 writes to the Corinthian church, and he says about Christ, he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures. That's what we celebrate today. And then he appeared to Cephas. That's the Greek name for Peter. He appeared to the 12. That's the event that we just saw. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. So he's saying to these people in Corinth, if you want, I can give you some cell phone numbers. These guys are still alive. And you can talk to them. And just ask them. There's 500. It's not just me and Peter and the rest of the apostles. 500 people saw him. So, and some of them are still alive. They haven't fallen asleep, aka died. So we could ask them. So in the early church, it spread throughout the world, especially when you read through Acts. It spread because first-hand witnesses were saying, well, yeah, I didn't see him, but this good buddy of mine did. And he told me the story is just unbelievable. So this first-hand or second-hand knowledge it spread verbally all across the Roman Empire. And people were saying, well, it happened. Well, how do you know it happened? Well, because I've got a friend who saw it. Or I saw him. I saw him. And that was the power of the testimony. Paul said, go looking. I'll give you names, 500. And then he goes on and says, and then he appeared to James, and then to all the apostles. And last of all, as if to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. And that's the Damascus Road experience. So this risen Jesus just keeps popping up lots of places. And the people who see him are given the responsibility to tell this good news to other people. This Jesus who had such a big deal for 3 years in Jerusalem, and he did all that teaching, and he got in trouble with the religious leaders. Well, you know what? They killed him. But then he came back to life. What does that mean? Well, and then you could launch into the good news. And that's what went on in those early years. So even Paul, as he writes to Corinth, and remember Corinth it's in Greece, it's the center of reason for the entire world, cultured reason. And he says that these cultured reason people who automatically think, show me. Greece was like the Missouri of the time. They think, show me. Paul could say, there's lots of people you could talk to who've seen him. That's the best show me I can give you. And even I saw him, he says. So these two guys have to say to themselves, believe what you know ain't so, or show me. Well, there seems to be a lot of show me going on in the New Testament to satisfy Vandiver's kind of position from a Missouri perspective. And then to close out, there's one last thing that's a real problem for people who don't want to believe, and that's what happened to the apostles after all of this. And I'll show you why this is a problem. They went all over the world. James, the son of Zebedee, is John's brother. He died before the end of the New Testament. He died in Acts 12 and was executed by Herod. But he ministered in Jerusalem and told people in Jerusalem about who Jesus was. Peter talked to people all over the Mediterranean area and eventually in Rome. He was crucified in 66 AD, upside down, because they were going to crucify him like a common criminal, but he said to them, no, I don't deserve that kind of honor because that's how my Lord was crucified, so do me upside down. Crucified him upside down. By the way, 66 AD is the dawn of the persecution of the Christians under this little twerp named Nero, who became Caesar. He was a teenager, and he started blaming all the inadequacies of his own governing of Rome on the Christians. And so that's why that persecution started. Peter was one of the first to go in that madness. Another guy to go in that madness was Paul. Paul's beheaded in 66 AD. Paul ministers all over the Mediterranean area, perhaps even as far west as Spain. And then eventually in Rome, he's there and he's beheaded in 66. Why wasn't he crucified? Because crucifixion was meant for people who were not citizens. But if you're a citizen, you get the great privilege of being beheaded. Which actually, that's a better way to go. So Paul's beheaded then. Andrew, the brother of Peter, he goes through Russia, Turkey, present-day Turkey, much of Greece. He's crucified eventually. Thomas, remember our doubting Thomas? He ended up going through most of the eastern part of Europe, eastern Syria, and even into India. And his presence in India is quite well documented. He was there, and there's a lot of people there who know things they shouldn't know about Thomas. He was pierced by 4 spears simultaneously. That's how the legend goes. Philip went all through North Africa, that is like the Carthage area, and through a lot of Turkey. He converted a Roman proconsul's wife to Christianity, and the Roman proconsul got so mad, he made life really hard for him and made a very slow death for him because his wife converted. You push on. Matthew was all over Persia, which is present-day Iran, and down in Ethiopia, in Africa. He was stabbed to death, we know. Matthew was the original tax collector named Levi. He also wrote the gospel. Bartholomew probably got around more than anybody else. He was also in India the same time that Thomas was, what's pretty well documented. He was also in Armenia, in Ethiopia, down in Africa, and then in Arabia, like the Saudi area. And there's a lot of different martyr accounts of how he went because he was just all over the place. We don't know which one's quite true. James, the son of Alphaeus, another one of the apostles, he was all throughout Syria. He was stoned and clubbed to death. Simon the Zealot was in Persia again, up in that Iran area. He was killed because he refused to sacrifice to the sun god there in Persia. So they said, "You're dead." Matthias, remember the guy who replaced Judas? He went all throughout Syria as well, and he was burned to death. Now I make this list because here's the problem. If the apostles actually did pull off a hoax, and they stole Jesus' body, and then people said they're pulling off this hoax that he stole his body, then it's very hard to account for why they would go all over the world individually and die for that hoax. That's a big problem. And another big problem with all this is the fact that as they go all throughout the world, this dedication to tell this story individually, I mean, they go individually. There's a couple that go in pairs and sometimes. But as they go individually, what happens is Christianity and the belief in who Jesus is, Messiah, just seems to explode throughout the Roman Empire and further away, even as far as India. Some people feel on the edges of China as well. I mean, it goes throughout a lot of the known world. If it's a hoax, it's impossible to believe that these guys individually, in the individual places they went, were that effective to be able to tell a lie. And not only that, it's impossible to believe that they would actually die for it. That doesn't make any sense. So here, in a way, you have the first-hand witnesses to the resurrection. The guys you could walk up to and say, did you see him? Did you touch him? Did you talk to him? And they would say, yes, 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 and yes. The rest of us here haven't had a chance to talk to them. But the power of their lives gives us a real problem, because if it wasn't the resurrection that caused them to do this, then you have to have an alternative explanation that's just as good. And that's the problem. Because I can't think of anything else just as good as the real resurrection to explain this. And that's, again, it's one of those show me things that God does for us, that we look and we can say, but were the first-hand witnesses who saw it, were they changed? Did they do anything remarkable with the rest of their lives? Or did they just go back to fishing and whatever? No, they split up and they told the entire world about it, to the point that it was so unpopular it caused their death. And they said the same thing in the places they went. And so here's just a gigantic show-me moment from how God designed the gospel to go out. If you can't come up with another alternative, gigantic reason that would explain for why they did what they did, then you're stuck with the resurrection. So really the question is, between these two guys, is faith just believing what you know ain't so, or is it really a process of show me the facts and I'll come up with a reasonable inference? Well, then it looks like Mark Twain's opinion is starting to go south, especially in what God is doing in accommodating our desire to show me and give me some evidence that I can work off of. Show me the facts, he says. And so in the best language of the courtroom, where in the courtroom you're given facts and then you have to infer the most reasonable explanation for those facts, the most reasonable inference based upon all of these facts, it's inescapable. It's that the tomb was empty because Jesus was raised. That's really it's the best going explanation. And it happens to be the same explanation that the guys who all consistently gave their lives for kept saying. And so here's where we're at. God has looked at mankind and says, I think I've given you enough information on this whole thing about the resurrection. Now the issue isn't you being underinformed. It's about you being not willing. And that's where, as scientists and as historians, you get to. You can only collect so much information. You can't have perfect information really about anything. You can get a lot of information, but then at some point you have to infer what's really going on, what's behind all of this. And I just got to tell you, I can't imagine a better explanation. And so God has accommodated all mankind. And in the words of Jesus to Thomas, is it really because you saw me? Is that really why you believe? Or did we just get past a willingness point in your life? And now you believe. And that's the question that we come to every resurrection day like this. Did the resurrection really happen? It's crazy. Someone came from the dead. Is that really possible? Or was it just trumped up by a lot of people who just wanted it to be so? If it was trumped up by a lot of people who just wanted it to be so, I still can't explain the apostles' martyrdoms. It just does. They wouldn't die. That's right. And when they found persecution in Jerusalem after the crucifixion, they could have just presented the body of Jesus and said, oh, just kidding. There he is. Right here. They don't do that either. In fact, the body never shows up. So anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about this morning. You got to look at the resurrection as being an indelible mark on the history of mankind that you just can't quite erase based upon how clever your arguments are. You just get stuck. You just get stuck. It either is what it is, or I don't know what it is. There just are no good alternate explanations, and especially when you see the apostles one by one, individually, marching nobly to their own deaths. It's hard to believe it's a hoax. I can't see them being in Jerusalem, kind of putting, getting in the center, putting their hands in the center and saying, let's go deceive the world, ready, whoo, and turn around and go deceive the world. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. But the amazing thing is that from 66 AD, when you see Peter and Paul killed, it's officially illegal to be a Christian in Rome until 310, the Edict of Milan. So for the next 250 years, if you made known in public that you were a Christian, then you could be killed on the spot. And so people who joined this movement had everything to lose, and many of them did, because they gained Christ, and that was a good trade. The resurrection is an indelible mark on the timeline of human history that just cannot be easily explained away, and all mankind has enough facts, sufficient facts, to get to the point of the will. And so the question is he the King of Kings? Is he the one who conquered death itself? Is he the one who said to Pilate, my kingdom's not of this world? It's still coming. Still coming. You're about to be crucified. Yeah, after death. Is that all true? It all hinges on the resurrection, 100%. Okay, let's pray. Father, what an amazing story this is every year as we look at it. And in the bigger picture, we understand the looming gigantic details about how our sins are paid for through the death of Christ. And we get all that. Well, not totally, but we do get some of that. And yet it's an astonishing thing to us that throughout this timeline of history, it's just hard to explain this away. It's one of these facts that can't be rubbed out, and you can use every effort of logic possible, and as you investigate it, it just doesn't seem to wash. And so you have served notice to mankind that your Son came and died for them, as he told Nicodemus, because God so loved the world that he gave his Son. And so, God, I pray that you would continue in our hearts, if we're still wrestling over that, continue in our hearts to give us an understanding and point out where our indecision is less about the facts, perhaps, than necessary about the willingness and the consequences. Because, Lord, we know you love us, and those of us who've turned to follow you just want more of who you are, whether that's now or later. But we want more of you, because you died for us while we were still sinners. Extraordinary thing. So thank you for this reminder today and this great celebration and all of our friends and this great food and the ability to lift up such an incredible event and to remind our hearts and our minds again that there's much more than meets the eye about this Jesus, and he's with us even to the very end of the age. So we thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen.